Welcome back to the NOTCAST. It's episode 249 and today is the 13th of November 2022, which means that staggeringly 4 years ago today, I was right now watching U2 playing the very end of their Experience and Innocence tour in Berlin, probably around about this very moment, finishing the last song that I have to date seen them perform live, which is 13. There is a light. Today, I'm going to be talking about a record that came out 31 years ago and had an expansive, expensive, extortionate reissue this week. It is 151 minutes and 4 seconds long, 30 songs, 35 million copies sold. It is Guns N' Roses, Use Your Illusion, Un and Dieu, which was released on September 17th, 1991. And first off, there is a reissue box set version of it that was issued this week. I haven't bought it, and unless it gets massively reduced, I'm probably not going to either, on the grounds that it is woefully incomplete and woefully expensive, neither of which are particularly in my must-do tick boxes for a box set. First off, I think Use Your Illusion, this period for Guns N' Roses was, to coin a phrase, absurd. The band were bigger than Jesus and heavier than God, and they were a mini industry in their own right. I think they spent a lot of money, they earned a lot of money, they wasted a lot of money, and it's a period where I think, from somebody that was looking at it from the outside, and that is me as a guy that really would have liked to have been in a successful band in 1991, I was watching Guns N' Roses at that point in history, kind of both laughing at them and with them in one respect. I kind of saw the band at that point as kind of like almost like rock clowns. And I don't mean that in a necessarily a negative or pejorative way. It's just the idea of releasing two double albums on the same day, both of which were nearly, over 75 minutes long, 30 songs in total, seemed extortionate and excessive. I mean, personally, I know there's a lot of armchair quarterbacking about the Use Your Illusions albums. I, like pretty much everybody else on the internet who has an opinion, would have split these into two different releases, maybe spreading them out a little further apart and changing the running orders, which I will get to later on, of course, because you can't have a discussion about Use Your Illusion 1 or 2 without going, well, if I had my way, here's the alternate track listing, which is a perennial favourite up there with the Pink Floyd fans arguing about which one's nicer, Roger or David, and Peter Hook versus New Order arm wrestling in the corner. What would Load and Reload have been like as one album? What would Use Your Illusion have been like as one album? Who cares? We were there. But no, Use Your Illusion was... has not necessarily aged well, I think is the best way to describe it. These are bloated, overcooked, overblown albums, long arrangements, too many songs that should have been B-sides, some B-sides that should have been on the album, some songs that should never have been recorded at all, and a very, very convoluted history that went through it. Now, you start off the history of this album in January 1990, with actually December 1989 was the first time the band did any cohesive work on it, where they were in Mate's rehearsal studio, and they did some instrumental versions of 5 songs: Don't Damn Me, Garden of Eden, Dust and Bones, and I think The Garden as well. And they also then went into the studio and recorded for the soundtrack for a film called Days of Thunder, which apparently is not very good, and released their cover version of Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door, which tied in with the fact that they had been playing Knocking on Heaven's Door live, and it had made a live B-side way back when on one of the early kind of Appetite for Destruction singles, but they went in and did it in the studio. The second part of it was a song called Civil War that they recorded in June 1990, the last recordings with Steve Adler as a member of the band. And according to history, his drumming wasn't particularly good at that point. They had to piece together the finished version from multiple takes, And according to the story that's told in the book, My Appetite for Destruction, Stephen Adler, this charity shop special, £1.49, this was, they made him sign a contract where he agreed that he would not take drugs. And were he to be taking drugs, he would be fined $2,000. At which point he signed it, then realised that actually what it meant was if he ever took drugs if he ever took drugs ever again whilst in the band, he would be fired and paid £2,000 for the sum total of all his rights, which is what came to pass and later resulted in a court case, which I believe Stephen Adler won. But listening to the live performances, it's fair to say a band can only go as fast as its slowest member. And I think at the time, Stephen wasn't very good as a drummer. Better than me, but not good enough for the role. And I think there were some things in some of the songs, some of the material that's on the Use Your Illusion albums, which he would have struggled with. It wasn't his natural style to play those type of riffs and fills and approaches. I don't think he could have done it. A song like Estranged or Locomotive, for example, would have been beyond Adler's capacity at the time. I don't know what it's like as a drummer these days. I don't particularly care. But he was fired, and then the band saw, we're going to go, okay, who are we going to get to do the job? And Slash remembered a drummer called Matt Sorum. Matt Sorum had played drums live with the Cult, and the Cult had supported Metallica, I think, in 1989 on the Damaged Justice tour. And Slash made the call. Matt came down and got the job. And that was then the Guns' new lineup. Dizzy Reed joined the group. Dizzy playing keyboards and bongos and piano and all manner of other stuff and backing vocals and whatever, rounding out Guns N' Roses as a finished 6-piece band. And then the band went into the studio and did a lot of recording, starting off with, and there's lots of rough mixes and instrumental versions of the songs and stuff that are circulating. Primarily, there are MP3 tapes going around of DATs, one of which is apparently Slash's copy, which has new Slash guitar riffs, which was a DAT, and rough mixes from the 21st of September 1990, which had 9 demos and included 4 songs that were later recorded for the Spaghetti Incident album. Then there was a second tape that's circulating, which is rough mixes from the 18th of January 1991. There's also Q-Sound mixes, Q-Sound being a revolutionary new audio type, which fell flat on his arse sometime in the 90s. And then there was also some recordings. The last recordings for the album were made on August the 3rd, 1991, when the final mixes were polished off. And those are kind of circulating. Obviously, the end results of that came into the form of these 2 albums. Now, these 2 albums, I think the thinking at the time was you get the band to put absolutely everything that you can onto the 2 albums, because firstly, there's no guarantee there's going to be a band, and secondly, there's no guarantee that the lineup is going to stay the same over the next 3 or 4 years. So you get everything out in one go, and it's all like a big splurge. And a lot of material that's on Use Your Illusion 1 and Use Your Illusion 2 were written and recorded during the Appetite for Destruction period. You know, Don't Cry, Back Off Bitch, for example, November Rain, and a couple of other songs as well, but were revisited. I think Right Next Door to Hell or Perfect Crime was played live as well in 1986. So a lot of songs were songs that were either held back from or deemed not to meet the style which we needed for Appetite for Destruction. And effectively, there's 4 different bands arguing amongst themselves during the Use Your Illusion periods. So you have this fast, frenetic kind of metal rock, things like Perfect Crime, You Could Be Mine, Right Next Door to Hell, that type of stuff. Then you have this big kind of stadium epic Elton John style multi-part songs, such as things like Locomotive, Coma, November Rain, Estranged, Civil War. There was a kind of like dirtier blues rock kind of approach that you would have. Stuff like Dust and Bones, 14 Years, Don't Damn Me, Bad Apples, that type of thing. And then you just have this kind of weird, kind of almost alt-rock country type stuff like You Ain't the First and Bad Obsession and all that. And it's all weird. You know, the band is all over the place, and these are weird and unusual albums. And I can't believe they sold 35 million copies. I genuinely can't. So the band started their touring, and I think I'll do an episode about the Spaghetti Incident and Live Era at another point. But I'm just going to throw these kind of dates and these live shows out primarily just so you know they exist, really, although I suspect you already do. The band played Rio on the 20th of January 1991. It was broadcast on television. Here is the DVD, the bootleg DVD of the television broadcast, the first show of the Use Your Illusion tour at Rock in Rio de Janeiro, January the 20th, 1991. They played a second show, which was on, let me just quickly check, it's on this unofficial box set, live in South America, Rio, 23rd of January 1991. Same set list as the first show, but this one, the second show, had Bad Apples on there, and that was the first time that Matt and Dizzy had played as members of GNR. They played a number of other shows, so they toured the album for 4 or 5 months before the album came out. They did an American row of theatres and then arenas and stadiums, and then they did some European stadium shows. So one of the shows on the American arena run, St. Louis, this is the bootleg DVD of that, which features the ProShot screen feed cameras taken from a VHS. That was the first show where things started to go a little bit south for Guns. Axl stormed off stage halfway through Rocket Queen after the band had been playing for about an hour and a half because somebody was taking photographs in the crowd. And as Axl said in the introduction to Guns N' Roses, The Photographic History, which was a book that detailed the band up to 1993, the first sentence of this book is, right now, at its particular point in my life, I'm a person who doesn't particularly like to have his fucking photograph taken. And so therefore people taking photographs of him at gigs were things that annoyed him immensely because there was a lot of money that was going around GNR and people were selling concert photos of GNR. So he presumably thought this guy taking photographs, who was not meant to be taking photographs, was going to sell them and make money out of Axl Rose. Although, given how late Axl often was and how much money he ran up in overtime fines, money was not something that he was necessarily motivated by, although we'll get to that when we talk about the tour in more detail. So there was the famous St. Louis riot show in 1991. This happened on July the 22nd at the Riverport Amphitheatre. And they also did a radio broadcast. Let me see if I can remember where I've stuck that. From the Indiana Noblesville Deer Creek on the 28th and 29th of May 1991. That was a broadcast on the radio. Here's a bootleg CD of it. And here is also a very recently pressed bootleg double LP. And since the live album, Live Era 87 to 93, was only released on vinyl in America as a 4LP box set, currently sells on Discogs for about £400. I'm quite happy to pay $19.99 for this to get a GNR live double album on vinyl, because if they wanted me to own that one, they would have bloody well have pressed it, wouldn't they? They seem to put their names to anything but the records and the represses and decent value box sets as well. That was the tour. They also filmed a show at the New York Ritz on, I think, the 16th of May 1991, and that was used for the promotional video for the first physical single released from the album. The single You Could Be Mine, which appears in the soundtrack for the film Terminator 2 Judgment Day, a fantastic movie I watched recently. And the video for You Could Be Mine featured a live performance from the New York Ritz, intercut with specially shot footage and stuff from Terminator 2, the movie. It was backed with Civil War, the LP version on the 7-inch, and the LP version of You Could Be Mine. And the LP version of Civil War had been released in 1990 for, I think, the Romanian war charity album, and so it practically become a GNR single, and this was a way of making sure that people could own that song without having to buy the compilation album. Anyway, taken from the forthcoming album Use Your Illusion 2 and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, You Could Be Mine. The video for You Could Be Mine was filmed on 35mm film, and the show was recently exhumed, scanned and recompiled and re-edited as the live Blu-ray that comes in the expensive £250 7-disc box set of Use Your Illusion. which is, to put bluntly, an absolute bloody rip-off. And I haven't bought it because £250 for 2 live shows and the 2 studio albums and a box and a book and a Blu-ray with a live show on is a rip-off. You Could Be Mine, fantastic single, by the way. But it was, in terms of drumming, it opens on this fantastic kind of roll. The kind of thing that personally I think Steven Adler would probably have really struggled with at that point in history. So having Matt in completely changed the gear and the dynamic of the band. There's a lot of people that talk about who was the best drummer that Guns ever had. A lot of people are very boring, me included. And I think that Matt was a far more mechanical, far more precise, far more rigid drummer. He had less groove and he had less flair, but he was very, very solid. It's like a human drum machine, whereas Adler was far more fluid and far more flexible, but he was lacking in chops and fills and technical precision. And so the difference between the two is, for example, Steven Adler's playing, it would be like having a Ferrari, and Matt Sorum's playing would be like having, a long haul truck. They're different vehicles, they do different things, different ways. They're both very, very good at what they do, but they are completely different beasties. And it put the band into different areas. There were things that they did on Use Your Illusion they couldn't have done with the Appetite for Destruction lineup, and vice versa. So the album came out September 17th, 1991. And at this point, Izzy had already signalled to the band his intention to leave Guns N' Roses. There was a show, and I think it was Helsinki, where Axl stormed off stage and disappeared for 25 minutes while the band played an instrumental pit set, including things like 14 Years, Dust and Bones, some instrumental stuff, some drum solos, some guitar solos, and that was where it nearly turned into a riot. And Izzy made the decision during the course of that, when the band went off stage and it looked like the crowd would kick off, that he didn't want to be part of this particular circus anymore. But I said that Guns were rock clowns. For somebody like me who was a suburban 17, 18-year-old, and I wanted to be in a band, the idea of, storming off stage because the lights are slightly wrong or it's a bit windy, I was like, dude, I've done an office job. I know how terrible an office job is. Being in a band is both better and pays a heck of a lot better and gives you a heck of a lot more autonomy. I think it's fair to say that you could never be Axl's boss. No one could be Axl's boss. And the idea of storming off stage for 25 minutes is a little bit difficult. I've been at a gig where that's happened, and it's been because the mixing desk broke, and I was very annoyed. I sat there going, this is not just your time. You're not just fixing your technical things. You're wasting our time here. And we have places to go and we have very limited time. And the fact that you come on late. I think the first show on the tour where Axl came on late was, let me see if I've written that down actually, no, I think it's Indiana, I think. No, it's somewhere else, maybe the second, third date, something like that. Uniondale, that's where the Union's late start started. Uniondale in 1991. And that was, Axl coming on at 11, 12, half 12, the band playing a show until 3, 4 in the morning on a Wednesday. And whilst there's an element of going, well, yeah, it's the Guns N' Roses circus is in town. They're not 9 to 5 rock and roll people. There's also the point of going, the people that have paid to see you have jobs to go to. They have homes to go to. They have trains to catch, buses to catch. If they want to have a drink, then, they don't want to drive drunk home. So you either get a hotel and, roll in at 2 in the morning, or maybe 3 in the morning when the band have finished, or you just turn up on time and you play the show that you're meant to play at the time you're meant to play it. And overtime fines on the tour, you would be looking at least £1,000 a minute. So if Guns came on at, say, 11 o'clock and the curfew was 11 o'clock, they'd be paying £1,000 for every minute that they were on stage. And if they did a 3-hour show, it ends up costing them £180,000. So you end up paying to play in somewhere like Madison Square Garden because of how late you get on stage. And I think Izzy had enough of this. He was travelling separately from the rest of the band at the time. He was in a coach, he was sober, and the rest of the band weren't necessarily sober. I don't think Axl ever took any. I don't think Axl was ever had a drug issue, but some of the other members definitely did. According to the books, It's So Easy by Duff and the Slash book as well, and Matt's book, which I haven't read, but because it keeps getting put back, we're all very clearly riding the night train with Mr. Brownstone. But Izzy decided after the show in Helsinki, which almost turned into a riot if Axl hadn't gone back on stage, that he wanted to go. He'd had enough. It was too dangerous. You know, rock's great, but it should never result in anybody having being injured, anybody getting hurt, there ever being a riot. That's not how it should be. And obviously after St. Louis, sometimes you might think, right, so you've had one show where there was a riot because Axl stormed off stage, and suddenly you see there's going to be a second one, which is only going to be a few weeks later. You're kind of thinking, how many more riots are there going to be? How many more fights? How many more overdoses? And he decided that he was going to quit. He rang up Alan Niven the next day, and Alan said, you do it now, you're going to be wiped out. You need to see the tour out. So the last show that Izzy played with Guns in 1991 was at Wembley Stadium, and there was a period where I think he was semi-detached, where the band were trying to get him back in and he was trying to get out, and then the decision was made sometime in early November that it was final and Izzy was out of Guns and they needed another guitarist, and they hired a chap called Gilby Clarke, who was formerly in I can't even remember the name of the band now, but was an LA musician, played in a lot of bands and was quite good on rhythm guitar, and executed the job flawlessly. But I think Axl only ever saw him as a live guitarist. Izzy and Axl were the first two people that joined Guns. It was the Bond. They were like the Morrissey and the Marr of the groups, I guess, or maybe the Jagger and Richards. And not having Izzy there as the rhythm guitarist that wrote a lot of the songs, it started to unravel a little bit. If you look at the reissues of Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, and in fact all the Guns reissues since 2004, including Greatest Hits, all the songs on Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 are now credited to Rose, Stradlin, McKagan and Slash, the four members of the group, aside from obviously Dizzy and Matt. Whereas if you look at the credits on the original releases, these are the original 1991 vinyl editions, you can very clearly see who's actually identified as being the writer for each one of those songs. And the writing credits got very, very complicated. There's even an appearance on one song, I think it's Back Off Bitch actually, of a chap called Paul Huge, who will become more notable in the near future. Is Back Off Bitch on here? I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. And there you are. But of course, when you're dealing with 30 songs, it's very difficult to keep track of what album, which one of those songs are, which mix of it is it any good or not. The album was preceded by a second single. This is the single, Don't Cry. Here's the 12-inch picture disc from 1991. And here is the CD single from the same period. Now, the 12-inch picture disc and the CD single, the expanded formats, include one of the very, very few Stevie Nathan recordings that were issued during this period. It was the demo of Don't Cry that was recorded in, I think, 1985, and should have been on the box set for Appetite for Destruction, but for some reason wasn't. Instead, it was the demo of Don't Cry is only officially on this CD and 12-inch, and it's a bit of a waste, a bit of a shame, really. I don't understand why it's not on any other release, but there we have it. And it's the Appetite for Destruction lineup performing Don't Cry. So the band clearly had quite a lot of songs that were in their back pocket waiting to come out as and when it was necessary. So, Use Your Illusion 1. 17th of September 1991. This features the original sticker on here, which says, this album contains language that some listeners may find objectionable. They can fuck off and buy something from the New Age section instead. As indeed does this. And by the way, the art that this cover features. I think it is in the Louvre in Paris. I know I've seen it with my own eyes, and I was like, "That's the cover from Use Your Illusion." I didn't know I was going to see it, but there you are. I was going to go, oh, I was like, oh, there's a Mona Lisa in that room. I'm going to go and have a look at that instead. So there you have it. So there were a total of 8 singles released from these 2 albums, by the way, and I'm going to quickly race through almost all of those. They were, of course, You Could Be Mine, and then we had Don't Cry as the second single. Then we had Live and Let Die as the third single, which is backed with, by the way, the Live and Let Die CD single is backed with Shadow of Your Love, the studio recording by the Appetite for Destruction lineup, as well as a live version of Live and Let Die from Wembley Stadium. There was a 4th single, which was November Rain. I didn't buy November Rain because it was only backed with Sweet Child of Mine, and I really don't see the point of buying a single if it's only got stuff I already own on. Then there was Knocking on Heaven's Door, which this is backed with the live version of Knocking on Heaven's Door that was recorded at Wembley Stadium for the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. Then we had Yesterdays, which was again demoed in about 1986 and played live in the early days, and that's backed with November Rain and a live version of Yesterdays live from Las Vegas, as well as Knocking on Heaven's Door. We had Civil War, released as a single in its own right 2 years after it was the B-side of You Could Be Mine. There it is in some kind of weird and bizarre silver cover pack. And we had a video single for The Garden and Garden of Eden, as well as Estranged, which was released as a single in January 1994. This period was dripping in excess and dripping in basically everything was excessive. Even the excess was excessive. Apparently, it's rock's most debauched tour, and over the course of something like 116 shows and about 2,500 songs and something like 300 hours on stage, there is nothing that Guns didn't do. They expanded lineup, they contracted the lineup, they added 2 girl singers and a 4-person horse section and a harmonica player called Teddy Zigzag Andreas. They went all over the place and played everywhere, and it was all stadiums pretty much until they went into arenas. They struggled by the time they went back. So, for example, they played the Tokyo Dome in February 1992, which was responsible for these 2 DVD releases, which really should have been 1, but of course 2, because Guns is nothing if not excessive. They also did a show. Hang on, I'll have to get this DVD back in a second. And back in the room, they also played the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, playing Paradise City and Knocking on Heaven's Door here. At this point, they had also introduced the laughably awful Give Me Some Reggae section into Knocking on Heaven's Door. The Paris Hippodrome, here's a bootleg DVD of that was broadcast on pay-per-view television and later in the UK on Channel 4. And then they went and stripped the lineup a little bit after they'd played some shows in Argentina and in Santiago and Buenos Aires, which were on television and were included on this CD box set. The Santiago National Stadium on December the 2nd, played Buenos Aires, I think, on the 5th, which was broadcast on television. And then they stripped the lineup down to the 6 guys. Because they thought, well, we've done all this touring and we're still losing a load of money because we're going on stage at 12 or 11 at night, paying hundreds of thousands of pounds in overtime fees every time we leave the house, plus all the excess and the parties and the private jet and everything that went to it. They'd lost touch with reality. And I mean, even at the point where there was the video for Estranged, where there's Axel and he's kind of sat there in a video with a dolphin, talking to the dolphin and writing Lose Your Illusions, or There's a Lot Going On, for example, and you kind of sat there just going, dude, you're spending a lot of time in therapy, and frankly, it shows. It's kind of embarrassing. And they'd lost touch with reality. They really had. The video had them building their own churches, crashing cars and driving them off cliffs. And of course, when you're in that situation, there's no one that tells you no. So when somebody sat down and went, I've got a great idea. We're going to do 2 albums. There are going to be 30 songs on there. There's going to be a song that's a minute and a half long called My World, about a sociopathic psychotic state of bliss, which nobody in the band has ever heard until they get the finished CD. And we're also going to do a song called Get in the Ring, where I call out the names of the people that have written nasty reviews about us, and I individually name them. And so my playlist of this album, by the way, has Get in the Ring on it, but it's got an edit that takes out this particular verse, which is a one about, and that means you, Andy Searcher at Hit Parade, a Circus Magazine, Mick Wall at Kerrang, Bob Guccione Jr. at Spin. What pissed you off? Because your dad gets more pissy than you. Fuck you, suck my fucking dick. That's fucking pathetic. It really, really is. That firstly, the accusation that you're prepared to make to somebody is because they said things in the press that you don't like, that they're pissed off because their dad gets more pussy than them, and then go, "Ha, suck my dick," and it's like, dude, I was 17 or 18 when these albums came out, and I was sat there going, Jesus, that is childish, isn't it? That's embarrassing. Maybe not quite at the level of the Lies album embarrassing, but pretty bad. And well, Use Your Illusion 1 is a heck of a lot better than Use Your Illusion 2, because Use Your Illusion 1 doesn't have that terrible verse on, where the guy goes on about how terrible it is that some guy is getting not quite as much in the way of pussy as his dad. Oh my God, I can't believe he actually fucking said it. It's awful, isn't it? It really is. These are bloated, deeply flawed albums. The production is pretty good, actually. The drum sound is fantastic. I think they're, technically, you look at them and you go, well, they're well produced. They're excellent in that respect. But the songwriting just isn't there, really. Some of these songs should only ever have been B-sides. So, for example, looking at LP1, what would I have taken off there? Well, probably Back Off Bitch would have come off. I think probably Don't Damn Me, Dead Horse. Apparently Dead Horse is called Dead Horses on the reissue box set. And I would see that attention to detail there would have probably come off. And then on Use Your Illusion 2, this is the weaker of the two albums, undoubtedly. Let's just quickly have a look. So I would have taken Knocking on Heaven's Door off, because Knocking on Heaven's Door is not very good. And we all know that. It's, Bob Dylan cover, and frankly, Bob Dylan covers don't need more than that. Get in the Ring, oh, that's juvenile, isn't it? Shotgun Blues is unamazing. There's some bad songs on here. Now, I would have presented these as two separate albums released considerably further apart, with Use Your Illusion maybe early-ish 1991, and Use Your Illusion 2 maybe mid-1992 to tie in with the American Stadium Tour. And I would have changed the track listings appropriately. So my version of Use Your Illusion 1 would have had Right Next Door to Hell, You Could Be Mine, Perfect Crime, Double Talking Jive, Don't Cry, Yesterdays, Garden of Eden, The Garden, So Fine, Estranged, November Rain, Civil War, and Coma. And that would have run to 75 minutes. I'd have taken off Knocking on Heaven's Door and Live and Let Die. I'd have put those on an upcoming cover versions album. And then my version of Use Your Illusion 2 would have had a different running order. It would have had Bad Obsession, Bad Apples, Shotgun Blues, 14 Years, Dust and Bones, Don't Cry 2, Get in the Ring with that awful bit taken off, Don't Damn Me, Back Off Bitch, You Ain't the First, then Locomotive, Dead Horses, My World, and another song. Can't remember what that would have. Yep, that would have ended on My World. That would have been 66 minutes. And that first album would have been harder, rockier, more assertive, more aggressive, more to the point, punchier, faster. And what it would have done is it would have breached the band between Appetite for Destruction and the more verbose element of Use Your Illusion 2. And it would have been moved you into getting used to Guns playing longer, more complex songs. And then my version of Use Your Illusion 2 would have been the band kind of veering into less obvious, less single territory. I think apart from Don't Cry, I don't think there's one song that's a single on my version of Use Your Illusion 2. And it would have had, would have been an album without any singles next to it, but it would have stood up as a longer, more interesting and rewarding album. So, Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. Rather than have me go through each of the individual songs and go, that one's not good, that one's good, that one's quite good, because that is not very interesting. I could do a reaction video if you like. Wow, records! Really, they are two separate albums with two separate identities, and they've both been smushed together to make a release date. I think they're poorly sequenced. That is fair to say at this point. And the band just released an absurd number of singles, 8 singles, and apart from Shadow of Your Love and the demo of Don't Cry, no alternate studio tracks. And bearing in mind that there are something like 2 hours of alternate studio demos and recordings. Those aren't on the box set. There were at least 14 or so live shows that were recorded throughout this period that could have been used for B-sides. Got very, very little in the way of that. Guns looked at, let's say, the Don't Cry single or the You Could Be Mine single, and they didn't think, actually, do you know what? We'll put a couple of songs from Rio on there, and we'll give that, and we'll make that a little bit more attractive for people. They could have said, well, actually, let's put, say, Pretty Tied Up and Paradise City on that, or maybe Don't Cry, and then they could have put, well, let's put a track like, I don't know, Estranged on the B-side. Live and Let Die had a live version of Live and Let Die. You could have had Live and Let Die and Perfect Crime on there, for example. You could have looked at Knocking on Heaven's Door, and you could have put Knocking on Heaven's Door and Paradise City from the Freddie Mercury show on there. Yesterday's, put a live version of Yesterday's on there. Don't put the LP version of November Rain on there. And then, of course, the Civil War EP, which is backed with Garden of Eden, Dead Horse, and an interview with Slash. Again, useless selection of B-sides, utterly uninteresting. And very little in the way of music that nobody's ever heard before. And instead, Guns were moaning and bitching that fans were being drawn towards bootlegs and having to spend a fortune for live shows. Well, stick out the fucking live shows on your B-sides, guys. Do something about it. Because not only did you have the Deer Creek show in Noblesville, and you had the show in Chile, and you had the show in Buenos Aires on the 16th of July, the one that in Buenos Aires that was broadcast on television on the 17th of July, and you also had this show in Saskatoon, which is now also a bootleg DVD. You could have done anything like that, and this is where I think the Use Your Illusions period is just, the box set is insulting, it's inadequate, it's expensive, it's anorexic. The band had 14 or 15 live shows they could have released. They released 2. They had 2 or 3 hours of studio demos, including a number of songs which weren't released and were later re-recorded for the Spaghetti Incident album. You could have put those out. They had something like 10 shows which were filmed, which we know were filmed, which are on YouTube, and I'm going to post links to them down there, which could have been out there. But instead, Guns wanted to sell you the Use Your Illusion Super Deluxe Edition with 2 live shows you've never heard before, and a version of November Rain with an actual live orchestra. Apparently, Stephen Wilson has done Atmos mixes of those albums, which the band have chosen not to release. And it's just, frankly, insulting to charge people £250 for such a anorexic slim box set. Just thinking about what could have been on the DVD or the Blu-ray release, instead of New York Ritz 1991 and that being it, you could have put, I don't know, let's say you could have put, Rio and St. Louis, and you could have put Tokyo, and you could have put Wembley Stadium on there, and you could have put the Paris Hippodrome show, and you could have put Saskatoon on there, and you could have put the Buenos Aires and your Santiago show, and you could have done a heck of a lot more than that. But instead, you just get one show in Vegas, the show at the New York Ritz, which is on CD and Blu-ray, and you get the albums, and that's it. Thank you very much. £250. Come on, suckers, cough up. It's not very good, it really isn't, and it works out at about £34 a CD. You'd have thought that over the 192 shows and 7 million people that they played to, they would have recorded more than 2 of them, and also these days, looking at that price tag, it kind of tells you that the band have lost touch with reality. I can't speak for anybody else. I'm very lucky in my work outside of doing the NOTCAST, and in my life outside of that. And, financially, I am not as poor as I once was. And this box set is just way, way, way out of my reach, and I am exactly the target market that they should be targeting with it, but they've chosen not to. Now, part of this is a long and convoluted way of me going, oh, I can't afford the box set, it's awful, sucks to be me. And I'm like, £250 for 7 CDs, and it's 2 studio albums and 2 live shows and a Blu-ray with a live show on for 250. That works out about £50 an item. And you wouldn't pay £50 for Guns N' Roses live in Vegas on CD. You wouldn't pay £50 for Guns N' Roses live in New York on CD. You wouldn't pay £50 for Use Your Illusions 1 and 2. And you wouldn't pay £50 for GNR's Use Your Illusions on, or you wouldn't pay £50 for the New York Rich show as a Blu-ray. You just fucking wouldn't, because you've got, common sense. In fact, this is my version I've rigged up with a colour photocopier in the 90s of Use Your Illusions 1 and 2, where I've put them both in a dual fat box and created effectively the double LP version. And even then, if you go by the parameters of what's in the box set, that would cost you £100. If you go by the parameters of what's in the box set, your Vegas show would cost 50 quid, and your New York Rich show would cost 50 quid, and your New York Rich show on Blu-ray would cost 50 quid. Or if you go to YouTube, it's free. Use Your Illusions as a box set is terrible. It has 2 separate albums. They are bloated and convoluted. They're incoherent. They're poorly sequenced. They've got very possibly the very worst minute of Guns N' Roses music that's ever been recorded, apart from possibly 1 in a million. And that is, of course, hey, you, Mick Wall at Kerrang, you're terrible and I'm brilliant section of Get in the Ring, which is, Jesus, it's the sound of a man with a very small grudge shouting through a megaphone to 35 million people, and 34,999,999 of them are sat there going, geez, dude, really? And like the one guy, he thinks it's a good idea, let's say his name might be Waxel Woes, he's going, I've got it, guys, we'll sock it to the newspapers and we'll sock it to the magazines. Whereas now everyone's going, do you know what, I just want to read the articles that really, really piss the band off. And that's an example of the Barbra Streisand effect, where what you're intending to do is actually completely negated by what you've actually done and what you were hoping to achieve. Instead, you're drawing attention to where it's gone terribly, terribly wrong. So, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, Guns N' Roses' 3rd and 4th studio albums. Absolutely essential if you're a Guns fan. They're long, they're bloated, they're fascinating, because it's what happens when a band gets money, power and complete control and nobody tells them no. And where everyone else is around them kind of goes, that's the golden goose. You don't want to tell it off. You don't want to piss it off. You don't want to piss him off. And this is what happens where you've got the guy or one of the guys that's steering the ship that thinks he's indispensable, and suddenly all that power goes to his head. Remember, absolute rock and roll corrupts, absolutely, and Guns N' Roses were absolutely the most rock and roll band of all time. They were big, dumb, stupid, loud. They did daft things. They wasted a lot of money. They pissed off a lot of people. They played a lot of shows, and it's the kind of thing that could never, ever happen again. Thankfully, the excesses are all recorded in this book and this book, where you kind of get an insight into what it was like to be a member of Guns N' Roses at the time. And you kind of sat there going, these are young people who aren't very mature, who have suddenly been given more power than sense. They just found $1 million that somebody forgot, and then they've just decided they're going to go and take that and they're going to go and fly to the moon with it, figuratively, and in some cases probably literally, whilst Axl was off hanging out with dolphins. And looking at it now, you can kind of go, as the headline goes, it seems excessive, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It happened, and as a 17, 18-year-old kid who was experiencing it through the pages of Kerrang and Melody Maker and NME and Rolling Stone and stuff on a monthly and a weekly basis, I was watching the wheels come off this, kind of like that gif of Jon Stewart wearing 3D glasses eating popcorn, just kind of go, how long is it going to be until this whole kit and caboodle comes crashing in on their heads? The answer was not very long. which of course is what happens when we get to the spaghetti incident and live era, which are going to be my next Guns N' Roses episodes whenever I can be bothered to do them. So that is GNR, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. There's a lot going on. I'm going to go and hang out with some dolphins now and pretend that I'm a really deep, meaningful artist as opposed to a rock star wanker who's gone a little bit up his own butthole, which is frankly where GNR had gone at this point in time. And you know what? For all of that criticism, I love them. I think they were great. They were stupid and daft, but I knew it, and I was kind of going along with the ride to see how ridiculous it is. In the same way that, yeah, I love Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin is stupid, and it's kind of like, wizard rock for virgins in some respects. You kind of read the lyrics to some of these songs and you go, dude, have you ever actually spoken to a woman? Have you ever had a meaningful relationship with another human being? And then you kind of go, well, probably about the time that you wrote Back Off Bitch, that maybe that wasn't the period in your life when you'd actually held the hand of another living human. And it's just, oh man, it's awful. Just all of them, all these lyrics, and there are some great songs on here. Use Your Illusions 1 and 2 would have made a fantastic single album, and have made a ridiculous double album, and should have been two separate records with two separate personalities released in two separate years, far, far away from each other. Instead, we got it all in one go. This was a meal that was too big to eat, and parts of it weren't cooked. But you know what? It was all served to us. And at the time that this came out, which was 1991, even I knew it was ridiculous. And I was only 18 years old. Coming at it now, 31 years later, I almost said 20, 31 years later, as a guy who's going to be 50 soon, this is the sound of a permanent adolescence. And I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I experienced it. I'm not sure how I would look at it if I was coming to this now. If I was going to a record that had been made, say, 10 years before I was born, and I'm 21 years old and I'm listening to it now, I'm not sure whether I just go, ugh. But here we are. And, Use Your Illusions 1 and 2, they're deeply, deeply flawed. And for that, I love them, warts and all, and what a lot of warts there are. So keep watching, and I'll catch up with you all soon. Stay beautiful, and see you all again sometime not too far away from here. See you later. Bye.